Camping stories began for me around the age of 20, but I had started gathering them when I was only 7. At that age, these stories were a source of comfort. Spending time with Dad hiking, staying safe under his guidance, chasing squirrels to catch and eat, and discovering herbs with their fresh, calming scents. However, there's one story I can never forget. I was just 8 when I went with my father to the Maryland woods, and that night remains one of the most haunting memories of my life. When you're a child, reality has a way of feeling flexible. Everything seems possible, and the world can shift unexpectedly. That night, the shift came, and it changed everything I thought I knew. Dad and I would often visit Grandpa's house on the outskirts of a quiet town, as many retired artists had moved there to live a simple life surrounded by trees and nature. Grandpa's house was old, sitting on the edge of town and surrounded by dense gum trees. The gravel driveway twisted and snaked its way to his home, a path that seemed to take you far from neighbors. The air always carried the scent of fresh herbs and wood, which had always brought me a sense of peace as a child. I used to love those visits. They were the kind of trips that allowed freedom, running in the yard, picking fruit, or chasing after the dogs. But on this particular visit, things took a terrifying turn. After spending time with Grandpa, Dad decided to drive back late one evening. The air was cool, and there was a light breeze as we said our goodbyes. I got into the front seat of the car while Dad exchanged his hug with Grandpa. We began our journey home, the engine humming as we set out down the narrow road. That road is still etched in my memory because of its twisted path and the dense trees lining each side. On a quiet night, the only thing visible outside the windows would be dark trees and the occasional glow of headlights. It was always a bit unnerving, though I couldn't explain why, especially as a child. That night, something felt different. Before even leaving the driveway, I could sense that something was wrong. Dad was silent, no music played, and he wasn't engaging with me as he usually would. His focus was sharp, like that of a new driver, and I could feel tension radiating from him as we started down the road. The trees grew thicker on either side, their branches twisting like grasping hands. The headlights illuminated the path ahead, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. While staring out the window, I saw movement. Came from the corner of my eye, near the far end of Grandpa's driveway, close to his garage. Something was moving. At first, I thought it was a stray animal, a dog, or maybe even a bird. But as I focused, my stomach sank. It was a person, or something that looked very much like a person. It was thin, skeletal, almost drained of life. Its pale skin stretched tight over visible bones. Its arms moved unnaturally as it crawled on all fours across the gravel, hands wide and grasping. Its head was large, and though its face was turned away, the faint glow of its sunken eyes reflected the car headlights. My heart stopped. I stared, unable to move, unable to cry out. I jumped back in my seat, gasping, trying to process what I saw. My hands clenched the edge of the seat. I turned toward my father, desperate. "Dad, there's something weird there," I whispered. He paused the car for a moment, his eyes on the dark road. I could see him trying to figure out what I meant, but his face showed no worry. His voice came steady and calm as he placed a hand on my shoulder. "Don't look there, son. Strange things like that exist in the woods. They harm bad people, but they won't harm us." His calm words shocked me. He hugged me and kissed the top of my head, trying to change the mood. "Come on, let's put on your favorite music and grab some chips. I know you're hungry." He tried to distract me, but my eyes kept going back to where I saw that creature. I pulled out the chips and stared into the dark again, my stomach in knots. When I looked back toward the spot, it was gone. The gravel was empty, no crawling figure, no pale body. I blinked, my breath quickening. Was I dreaming? But then the cold sweat on my face and my racing heart told me otherwise. That thing had been real. I turned back toward Dad, my voice shaking. Did you see that?" For a moment, he didn't answer. Then quietly he nodded. "Yes, son," he said, his voice low. "I saw it." He gave me a reassuring smile, increasing the volume of the song and driving faster. He handed me a chip and tried to lighten the mood. We drove in silence for the rest of the trip. The road stretched on, and I couldn't stop thinking about what I saw. My mind kept replaying that skeletal figure, its glowing eyes and unnatural movements. Dad tried to change the subject, asking me about school, friends, and games, but nothing worked. I couldn't forget it. Before we left the outskirts, we stopped at a small convenience store. We grabbed ice cream cones and some ramen, and Dad talked about how he used to face his own fears as a kid. He shared a story about getting scared, having to be cheered up by Grandpa at the ice cream shop, and that moment managed to pull a small laugh from me. When we made it back home, the night air felt heavier than usual, as though the world was holding its breath. I couldn't shake the sensation that what we had seen was more than a trick of the light or a random accident. It lingered in my chest, a feeling that whatever had been there in the dark woods might still be out there. That night, my mother stayed with me. She probably knew what had happened, though Dad never said anything. She held me close, her presence soothing but not enough to erase the image from my mind. It's been many years since then. I'm about to enter high school, and I've had many trips to forests since. Yet that night remains with me, a chilling memory. I've come to believe that there are places in this world where things don't quite follow the rules, places where you see things that can't be explained, things you can never forget. Grandpa's property was one of those places. What I saw that night will never leave me, and I know I'll never truly understand it. All I can say is this: some things should never remain hidden in the dark, and some creatures should never crawl across gravel roads, waiting to be seen. Hiking through the dense woods has always been a soothing way to clear my mind, but I never imagined that one event would completely shift how I view the forest. Sometimes, a single experience can change your life forever, shaping you into a shadow of your former self. For me, that change was a descent into something much darker. Before that event, the mountains felt like a refuge. They were where I could reconnect with myself, finding peace and solitude. I would meet other hikers on the trail, sharing stories and realizing just how vast the world truly is. There was joy in sitting by a lake, tossing stones across the ripples, but all of that was stripped away in an instant. I've never shared the full story with anyone, but maybe putting it into words will help me come to terms with what happened. It was 2020, a cool autumn morning when I decided to take a solo hiking trip over the weekend. I wasn't in the mood for adventure, so I chose a trail I knew well. The path was quiet and familiar, with the occasional hiker here and there, but no more than 5 at a time. I loved taking photographs, and this particular trail offered some of the most breathtaking views around. The night before, I had packed everything I needed: water, snacks, a flashlight, and my phone to capture the scenery. My plan was simple: reach a familiar clearing, relax for a while, and return to the car before sunset. The sound of wind rustling through the trees, leaves crunching underfoot, and birds or other wildlife in the distance had always been comforting to me. But as I began my way back to the trailhead late in the afternoon, something felt off. About 100 yards from my car, I noticed a small campsite. When I passed by earlier, it had appeared neat and well-maintained, with a tent set up, a folded chair, and a small pile of firewood. Now, however, it looked entirely different. The tent was collapsed, the chair overturned, and supplies scattered across the ground. Clothing, a backpack, and even hiking boots lying haphazardly. At first, I thought perhaps wild animals had gotten into the campsite. Bears roamed this area, and they could be destructive when searching for food. But as I got closer, I felt an unease that I couldn't shake. There were no claw marks, no evidence of rummaging through supplies, just sheer chaos, as if someone had left in a hurry or had been interrupted. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" But the only answer was silence. I debated leaving, convincing myself that whatever had happened there wasn't my problem. Still, curiosity held me. I couldn't stop myself from exploring. Near the edge of the campsite, I spotted a trail of footprints leading into the woods. They were faint but visible in the soft dirt. The prints didn't look like typical hiking boot impressions. There were deeper, misshapen marks alongside them, as though something heavy had been dragged through the forest. My mind raced as I wondered whether this could have been the result of animals or humans. But the odd trail only deepened my confusion. Following the footprints brought me to the mouth of a cave I hadn't noticed before. It was partially concealed by overgrown bushes and jagged rocks. The air that emerged from the cave was colder, carrying a faint, unpleasant odor. My instincts screamed at me to leave, to retreat and forget this place ever existed. But then I heard something, a wet, slithering sound, coming from inside the cave. My heart pounded as I crouched behind a rock and tried to peer into the dark. That's when I saw it. A creature emerged from the shadows, gray, skeletal, with elongated limbs that didn't seem built to move like that. Its skin was stretched taut over its bones, and it moved with jerky, insect-like motions. In its grasp, it dragged something or someone across the cave floor. A man's arm dangled lifelessly as the creature pulled it deeper into the darkness. I froze, my hand covering my mouth, struggling to suppress a gasp. Fear paralyzed me. What was this? What was I looking at? The creature froze, its head snapping upward as though sensing me. I ducked lower, barely breathing. When I mustered the courage to look again, it had disappeared. But then I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. Another figure emerged from the woods, pulling a woman behind it. Her long hair trailed in the dirt as she was dragged toward the cave. My stomach turned, and I felt bile rising. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on a root. I fell hard to the ground. The noise drew the attention of both creatures. Their glowing eyes locked onto mine. Time felt like it froze. A guttural screech came from their throats, and they began moving toward me. I can't remember much of what happened next. My body moved on instinct. I scrambled to my feet, running faster than I ever thought possible. The forest blurred around me as I wove through trees, my lungs burning with each breath. The screeches faded as I approached the trailhead, and finally, my car came into view. I fumbled with my keys, my hands trembling, nearly dropping them in my panic. I forced myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door shut, and locked it. The engine roared to life as I sped down the dirt road, kicking up a cloud of dust behind me. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. I was too afraid of what I might see. When I reached the main road, I pulled over, my chest heaving, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. What had just happened? My mind swam, trying to find a logical explanation. But nothing made sense. Couldn't calm down. I spotted a nearby motel sign in the distance and saw it as a refuge. I parked there, went through the motions of checking in, and found myself in a small, dingy room that, at that moment, felt like safety. I stayed there, trying to distract myself with coffee, biscuits, and TV shows. Nothing helped. The images haunted me. The glowing eyes, the gaunt bodies, the lifeless figures being dragged into the cave. Exhaustion eventually took over, and I fell into a troubled sleep, plagued by nightmares. Each time I drifted off, I found myself back in the forest, running, terrified, as those creatures pursued me. For years have passed since that day, but the memories haven't faded. I haven't set foot in the mountains again. I've tried convincing myself it was a hallucination, something my mind invented out of stress or exhaustion. But I know better. Those creatures were real. I saw them. I'll never forget the sound of their screeches, the feel of their presence, or the sight of the lifeless bodies they dragged into the cave. Some things aren't meant to be uncovered. Some mysteries should stay hidden. The forest that once felt like peace has become a place of dread. A lesson I learned in the worst way. The deep woods have always felt like a refuge to me, especially the forests of Tennessee. They held a unique kind of mystery ever since I was in my early 20s. As a child, I would often find myself wandering their endless stretches, where the oaks seemed to touch the sky like ancient guardians and the whispers of the wind carried secrets as old as the earth itself. These woods were my playground, my mentor, and my safe haven. But on one fateful day in November, they revealed a darkness I could never have imagined. That morning, Grandpa and I packed our gear and rifles into his old truck and drove toward our favorite hunting spot, deep in the woods. Grandpa had spent his entire life hunting these lands, and it was tradition for us to spend crisp autumn weekends tracking deer and sitting by the fire, sharing stories. The drive was always a peaceful time, allowing Grandpa his usual rants about how city people no longer respected the land. I smiled and nodded, knowing that his words came from a deep love for the woods and all they provided for us. By the time we reached the trailhead, the sun was rising, casting long shadows across the frost-covered earth. The air was sharp and still, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and wet leaves. It was the kind of morning that every hunter dreams of, when every sound and motion feels alive with promise. As we walked through the underbrush, Grandpa fell into his usual rhythm, spotting animal tracks and broken branches like he was reading a book about the woods. "See that?" he said, pointing to a patch of disturbed soil. "Deer bedded here last night. Bet they're still close." I nodded, my eyes scanning the area ahead. But as we ventured further, the forest began to change. The familiar bird songs that usually accompanied our walks grew slower and eventually disappeared entirely. The rustling leaves and the chatter of squirrels fell away, replaced by an eerie, heavy silence. "Grandpa," I whispered, my voice barely breaking the stillness. "Why is it so quiet?" He stopped, his eyes scanning the treetops. "The woods are thinking," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means we're not alone," he replied, his hand resting on his rifle. "Stay close." We moved forward, the oppressive quiet wrapping itself around us. Every snap of a twig or distant rustle sent my heart into my throat. I'd hunted with Grandpa countless times, but I'd never felt this way before. Ahead, about 50 yards in a small clearing, we saw it. A buck standing still. It was a majestic animal, its antlers branching out like a crown, but something about it felt wrong. Its head was hanging low, its movements sluggish, and its coat had an unnatural sheen as though it were wet. "Take the shot," Grandpa whispered, his voice steady despite the unease in his eyes. I raised my rifle, aiming for its chest, my finger hovering over the trigger. But I hesitated. There was something about the way it stood, its head cocked slightly as though it was observing me. My stomach churned. "Shoot," Grandpa urged, more insistently this time. I fired, and the shot rang out through the trees. The buck staggered but didn't fall. Instead, it turned and bolted into the underbrush, moving with surprising speed and grace. "Damn," Grandpa muttered. "Must have just grazed it. Let's track it." We followed the trail of blood across the frost-covered leaves. The deeper we went into the woods, the darker it seemed to become. The trees grew larger, their gnarled branches twisting like skeletal hands overhead. The air turned colder, and the silence became almost unbearable. After about 20 minutes, we found it, or what was left of it. The buck lay in a clearing, its body torn apart. Its ribs stuck out like jagged spears, and its insides were completely gone, as if something had hollowed it out with surgical precision. But there was no blood, not a single drop. "What in the hell?" Grandpa muttered, his voice trailing off. I took a step closer, my stomach twisting at the sight. What could do this? Grandpa didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the carcass, his face pale. Then we heard it. A low, guttural growl that sent chills running through me. It was unlike any sound I'd ever heard. A deep, primal growl that seemed to resonate through the trees like a warning. "Get your rifle," Grandpa whispered, his voice shaking. I fumbled for my weapon, my hands trembling. The growl came again, closer this time. I saw it then. At first, just a shadow moving between the trees. But as it stepped into the clearing, my breath froze in my chest. It was enormous, standing at least 7 feet tall on 2 long, emaciated legs. Its skin was stretched tight over its bones, and its arms ended in claw-like hands that twitched with anticipation. Its face was the worst part. A grotesque, distorted version of the buck we had been tracking, its hollow eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "Run," Grandpa hissed, his voice barely audible. "What?" I stammered, unable to look away from the creature. "Run," he shouted, raising his rifle and firing. The sound of the shot snapped me out of my trance, and I turned, bolting on pure instinct. My legs carried me forward, my heart pounding, lungs burning. Behind me, I heard the crack of another gunshot, followed by a guttural roar that shook the ground. I didn't stop running until I reached the truck. I climbed inside, my chest heaving. I didn't dare look back. Minutes later, Grandpa emerged from the woods, his face pale and his hands shaking. He didn't say a word as he climbed into the truck and started the engine. As we drove away, I broke the silence. "What was that?" Grandpa shook his head, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I don't know, and I don't want to know." We never spoke of it again. Not that day, not ever. But the memory haunted me, living in my dreams and gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. Years later, I still avoid those woods. Some things are better left forgotten. Yet, every now and then, I catch myself glancing toward the tree line, half expecting to see those hollow eyes watching from the shadows. The woods took that buck back, and they almost took us too. Hunting nightmares could be frightening, but for me, hunting wasn't about the kill. It was about those peaceful moments in nature, the way the world seemed to hold its breath in the soft glow of morning and the crisp, clean air. It was an escape from life's noise, a way to connect with something ancient and untouched. But this trip, the one I'm about to share, changed everything. It was late October in 2020 when I set off alone on a hunting trip deep in the mountains. The leaves had turned shades of red and orange, and the air carried a slight chill. The woods were alive with sound, the kind of sound that feels natural and timeless. I had been out for 3 days already, and the hunt had been uneventful. I'd seen a few deer, but they were always too far off or too young. That morning, I decided to head toward the eastern ridge, a less traveled part of the mountain where I had been successful in the past. The day moved slowly as I navigated through the woods, scanning for any sign of movement. By the time afternoon rolled in, the sun was sinking lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor. That's when I spotted a deer, standing still about 50 yards away. There was something strange about it. Its body was thin, almost skeletal, and its fur was patchy and lifeless. Its head hung low, and its breathing sounded labored, every exhale forming faint clouds in the cold air. I'd encountered sick animals before, but this felt different. The deer looked off, It seemed unnatural, as though it didn't belong here. Every hunter has moments like this, moments when instinct and logic clash. I hesitated, torn. The thought of leaving it behind in its suffering gnawed at me. It didn't feel right. Slowly, I raised my bow and drew the string back as quietly as I could. The deer didn't move, didn't flinch. Its eyes were unfocused, as though staring right through me. I released the arrow, and it struck true, embedding itself deep into the deer's side. That should have been the end of it. But then, the deer let out a terrible, guttural screech that made my blood freeze. It didn't collapse. Instead, its body began to twist and contort in ways that felt unnatural. My heart pounded as I watched it rise. Not on 4 legs, but on 2. Its limbs stretched and reshaped themselves, bending and cracking as they moved. Its neck snapped upright, and its face shifted into something both horrifying and human-like. Its eyes, once dull, glowed faintly with an ominous light. Its mouth split open to reveal jagged teeth dripping with saliva. I stumbled back, my bow falling from my hands. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing. It wasn't real, couldn't be real. The creature took a step toward me, its movements jerky and unnatural. I tried to grab another arrow, but my hands were shaking too hard. It let out another screech, and I panicked. I turned and ran, branches slapping my face and the ground shifting underfoot as I sprinted through the trees. Behind me, I could hear it crashing through the underbrush, its growls sending waves of terror through me. I don't know how far I ran. Eventually, the sounds of pursuit faded. My lungs felt like they would burst, and my legs felt ready to give out. I found a large tree and crouched behind it, struggling to catch my breath. The woods had gone quiet, so quiet that even the birds seemed to have stopped chirping. After what felt like hours, I gathered the courage to return to my camp. My thoughts swirled in a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. What had I just seen? Was it some kind of predator I didn't know about, or something entirely different? When I finally reached my camp, my heart sank. Everything had been destroyed. My tent was in tatters, the fabric shredded and caught on the poles. My supplies were scattered, my cooler overturned. My gear lay broken, thrown about as though by a powerful force. Even the fire pit had been disturbed, rocks scattered as though a giant had been pacing there. And then I noticed the footprints. They were enormous, far larger than any humans, and deep in the dirt. The shape of them was wrong. Elongated toes with claw-like impressions at the tips. They crisscrossed the camp erratically, as if something had lingered there for a long time. I didn't stay to investigate further. I grabbed whatever I could, a water bottle, a flashlight, my knife, and fled down the mountain as quickly as I could, sticking to the trail. The entire way down, I felt eyes on me. It felt like the creature was waiting just beyond the trees, watching. By the time I reached my truck, the sun had set and darkness had fallen. I jumped into the vehicle, locked the doors, and drove away without looking back. My hands shook so hard I could barely grip the wheel, and my mind felt blank with fear and confusion. When I finally made it home, I promised myself I wouldn't tell anyone about what had happened. Who would believe me? They would think I was crazy or making it up. So I lied. When friends asked about my trip, I said everything was fine. I said I hadn't had much luck but had enjoyed the peace of the woods. But the truth has haunted me every single day since. I've spent countless hours trying to find an explanation. The closest I've come are old legends, stories of skinwalkers, wendigos, and other creatures said to haunt the deep woods. But they're just myths, right? Campfire tales to frighten children. Except I know what I saw. I haven't gone back to those mountains. The thought of the woods, of that thing, fills me with a fear I can't shake. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't just an animal. Some things are meant to stay unknown. Some places aren't meant to be disturbed. The mountains, once a place of peace, have become a place of nightmares, and I'll never return. Camping has always been my greatest passion, but the tales I've gathered from it are chilling, especially a few that still send shivers down my spine. The wilderness harbors mysteries that defy explanation, enigmas crafted not by humans but by spirits, wild creatures, and nature itself. Nature can deceive anyone in an instant, and that's exactly what happened to Ethan, my closest friend, and me 2 decades ago. We embarked on a weekend camping trip to the forests of eastern Oregon, and the experience has haunted us ever since. On our way back, we couldn't exchange a single word, breaking our tradition of monthly forest getaways. We needed time to confront the terror of what unfolded. The trip started like any other. Ethan and I packed our supplies into his weathered SUV, teased each other about my clumsy hiking skills compared to his, and headed towards an untouched section of the Cascade Mountain Range. This was new territory for us, a wild and uncharted stretch of forest that had an almost magnetic allure. The mountains loomed tall and forbidding, their summits cloaked in mist. The stillness of the place felt heavy, as if the air itself was charged with anticipation. By early afternoon, we had set up camp near a clearing with a decent view of the valley below. The spot was breathtaking, surrounded by towering pines and ancient oaks whose interlaced branches filtered the sunlight, creating a dim, almost cathedral-like atmosphere. We pitched our tent, kindled a small fire, and spent the day exploring trails and taking in the rugged beauty around us. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest grew eerily quiet. No insects chirped, no leaves rustled, and no distant animals howled. The silence was oppressive, amplifying every creak of a branch or crunch of soil underfoot. It was the kind of silence that made you feel like unseen eyes were watching your every move. But Ethan and I dismissed the unease, laughing it off as nerves and turning in early to prepare for the pre-dawn hours, prime for scouting wildlife. We drifted off without trouble, used to the forest's quirks. But sometime past midnight, a piercing scream ripped through the stillness, jolting us upright in our sleeping bags. My mind scrambled to identify the source, animal or human. The unrelenting, high-pitched wail confirmed it was human. My stomach knotted as the sound echoed through the trees. I whispered to Ethan, "Did you hear that?" His wide eyes told me he had. "Yeah, stay quiet." We listened, hearts pounding, trying to pinpoint the direction of the noise. Just as abruptly as it started, the scream stopped. The silence returned, but it felt even heavier. Then, faintly at first, a voice emerged, calling Ethan's name. It was a soft, drawn-out whisper, carried by the wind. The sound froze my blood. It felt otherworldly, as though something unseen was beckoning him. "Who's out there?" Ethan muttered, clutching his flashlight and rifle. I didn't answer, my throat too dry to form words. Against my protests, he decided to investigate, urging me to follow. Reluctantly, I grabbed my rifle, every step through the underbrush feeling like a betrayal of common sense. The voice called again, closer now, its tone almost playful. My pulse raced as I realized whatever was calling knew us. "Show yourself," Ethan shouted, his voice cutting through the oppressive quiet. Only the faint sound of snapping branches answered. Suddenly, something lunged from the darkness, a blur of motion and pale skin. Before I could process it, Ethan was tackled to the ground. I aimed my rifle at the attacker, my hands trembling, and fired. The shot echoed through the trees, and the figure let out a guttural snarl before vanishing into the shadows. Ethan scrambled to his feet, blood dripping from a wound on his forehead. "We have to leave," he gasped. Grabbing what little we could, we sprinted back to the truck, ignoring the branches and brambles clawing at us. We drove to a nearby campsite populated by other campers, where we spent the rest of the night huddled in fear. The next morning, we reported the incident to the local authorities, who listened with skepticism but agreed to investigate. When we returned to the site with the sheriff, the evidence was unsettling. A recently extinguished campfire, a few scattered supplies, and trampled underbrush suggested someone or something had been there. But there were no footprints, no signs of departure, nothing to explain what we'd encountered. The sheriff dismissed our story, warning us to steer clear of the area. The investigation went nowhere, leaving us with unanswered questions. That night marked the end of our camping trips. What had once been our sanctuary now felt like a place to be avoided. Even after 20 years, the memory remains vivid. The haunting voice, the oppressive silence, and the shadowy figures. Some things in this world are beyond understanding, and some places are best left unexplored. I've never returned to those woods, and I never will.